Last Tuesday afternoon, we lost electrical power at my house. Again. A tree had blown down across the road and took out the power lines along with the power pole. Again. I say again because, as many of you know and have heard me lament, this happens about 3 or 4 times a year. When one lives in the woods, it's just something you get used to. You know, I never get used to it. But it happens. Depending on the extent of the damage and the relative size of the tree and how many other power outages the power company is dealing with, restoration of our electricity can take anywhere from a few hours to several days. Tuesday's outage took 6 hours to restore. I'd say fix, except that there's still a power pole that's leaning almost horizontally across the creek that runs alongside the road. It's just like they wrapped the wires around it and kept going. I don't know. Nobody else seems concerned. Why should I be? Anyway, these outages happen quite frequently. And when it happened last December, again, this was around Christmas, I went out and bought a new generator. My old generator had died, and I hadn't replaced it. And what better time to replace it than when you need it the most? And it's like 2 degrees outside. Now, for my home, I don't really need a generator to run the whole house. These are inconveniences, but mostly I just need my well pump to work, because that's water, and flushing toilets. That's helpful. The heater is useful, particularly when it's 15 degrees out. And maybe a few lighting circuits. We can handle the rest of the inconvenience. Anyway, so I bought this new heater. Generator. Yeah. Anyway. That was an interesting slip. So I bought this new generator, and for a variety of reasons, this generator should have run my furnace, but it didn't. I won't even go into the rest of that story. But suffice to say, the computer controller in the furnace discerned that the generator was not grounded and therefore refused to turn on. The furnace refused to turn on. And this is where I began to learn more about grounding rods than I ever thought I needed to know. So a grounding rod, also known as an earthing rod, which is kind of a cooler name, I think, is a metal rod that is inserted into the ground to create a low-resistance electrical path between an electrical system and the earth. Got it? Makes sense. It's used to protect electrical systems and appliances from damage caused by lightning strikes and electrical surges. You can tell I just pulled that off the internet, right? By connecting the electrical systems to a grounding rod, the surge of electricity is safely directed into the earth, preventing damage to the electrical system. Grounding rods are typically made of copper, sometimes galvanized steel, and are driven into the ground until they reach a layer of soil that is moist and conducts electricity well. The electrical code requires that a grounding rod be 8 feet long. Got it? And, as I've learned, the entire 8 feet has to be driven into the ground. And then you attach a grounding wire from the rod to your electrical system, and in my case, a generator, which all sounds easy enough. But as I perused YouTube videos, this is where we go to learn how to do everything now, on the matter, I quickly learned that it isn't really that easy, because in this part of the country, as you all probably well know, that just below that nice surface level of dirt is clay and rock. Now, the rocks, the stones you see here, these came from my property. Just to give you the visual of what's under my what's under my grass. Plus, if you think about it, copper is a fairly soft metal. It's pretty easily bent. So you need enough force to hammer the rod through a very resistant earth, but not so much as to bend the rod. In one instructional video I watched, two men who appeared vastly more competent than I am, and certainly more practiced at this than I am, took the better part of 7 hours to drive a single grounding rod into the ground. Guess what, folks? I didn't do it. I haven't even attempted it. Anyway, I confess, I don't really understand electricity. The noun of it. The noun of electricity, the thing of it. Now, I learned the basics in high school physics, but that was a blur of equations and calculations. And I learned enough later on as I became a homeowner, enough to be able to install a ceiling fan or fix a light switch. You know, the positive, neutral ground, the black, white, and green wires. I'm glad they color code them. And where they attach to the fixture. I know how to turn a breaker on and off. 110, 220, it means something. One's scarier than the other. I don't know. I mostly know enough to do some basic home maintenance, plus enough to know when I'm way over my head and to call an electrician. But I've never really conceptually understood the what it is of electricity. And the funny thing is, when I don't know something, I'll ask people who you would think would know. Electricians, electrical engineers, physicists. None of them have ever been able to explain the thing of it to me. Sure, they talk about things like resistance and potential, current and voltage, and most end up just kind of sighing at my ignorance and mumble something about the movement of electrons. And it doesn't really help me. I'm looking for a thing. I'm looking for a noun. And perhaps I'm looking in the wrong place. Because perhaps electricity really isn't a noun. It isn't a thing. Perhaps I should think of electricity more as a particular form of energy, which is kind of helpful to me. Not always, but it's a start. Because I sort of understand energy in that liminal space between a noun and a verb. It's not quite a verb, it's not quite a noun, but energy, the way I use the term, the way I hear the term, sometimes fits in that in-between space between noun and verb, between a thing and an action, between resistance and potential. And because I know the embodied feeling of energy, and certainly the embodied feeling of its lack, you know, that energetic feeling I have after a good night's rest and a hot shower, and the whole depletion of energy I feel at the end of a long day. That surge of energy I receive when I get a hug, and the lack of energy I sense when I'm lonely. The rush of energy when I learn of the latest outrage, the latest atrocity, the latest political morass, the exhaustion of energy I experience when I feel helpless against all of that. Sometimes, when I'm very still and very attentive, I can even feel the energy that pulses through my body. The beat of the heart, the flow of blood, a sensation of tingling? I don't know. That's not quite the right word. Maybe more like vibration? That I think are my nerves sending their signals throughout my body. Not pain, although that's a kind of energy. Just a kind of hum, like an electrical transformer hums. I can feel the energy in a room. in a crowd, in an open and empty field. And sometimes it feels like there's too much energy flowing through and around me, too much noise, too much sorrow, too much pain, too many people, too few. And I get stressed. Stress perhaps being that overabundance of energy. I get stressed and I put all my stress right here. It's right there. You could probably see it. I can't. I know it's there. I ball it up and I can feel it. I can feel it pulsing, little electrons that are bouncing around in my shoulder like a bunch of kids in one of those bouncy houses that can't get out. The purpose of a grounding rod, as I understand it, is largely one of safety. The idea is that you're providing the electrical energy a low-resistance pathway into the earth where it can be diffused into the mass of this planet, which is particularly useful when the electrical load is more than you need, like when lightning strikes, or there's some surge of electricity in the system. Electricity will find its path to ground whether you put the grounding rod in or not. The danger is that without that intentional path of the grounding rod, the electricity will find other ways, other conductors, like you, for example, which may manifest for you as just a painful little shock all the way up to complete electrocution. A little bit of discomfort or death. So it seems to me that we need grounding rods in our life. A low-resistance pathway of moving the excess of energies that sometimes accumulate in our life, the stresses, the pains, the angers, the atrocities, the too much away from our bodies and diffuse it into the earth. This Wednesday is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar. It is Ramadan. It's interesting. Ramadan is based on a lunar calendar, and it's it's after the first viewing of the crescent moon. And driving into church today, I was observing the rise of the crescent moon against the sunrise. It was really low. It was huge. I'm like, wow, I get it now. Like, that does portend something. Anyway. As many of you probably know, Ramadan is the Islamic holy time. It's a month-long time of fasting. It's probably the part you know the best, the fasting. It's a time of prayer, of reflection, of community. Muslims who have come of age will fast from dawn to dusk every day for that month. It's a time of deep spiritual reflection and deep devotion to worship. And the intent is to redirect the faithful's attention away from their everyday worldly activity and cleanse their souls. It's a time of practice, of self-discipline and self-control, of cultivating empathy and generosity. It's a time of connection to family and community. And friends, while there is celebration in there, it isn't easy. It is not easy. I attempted a sort of a solidarity fast one year. My neighbor was a Muslim man, and he invited me in. I think he did it as a joke. He was clever that way. But it was Ramadan at that point had started in July. So it's a longer daytime period where you're not eating. Very short. And he, after I failed in a couple of days, and he confessed that the first time that he had fasted for Ramadan when he was a kid, it was January. And he thought, this is easy. No problem. I got this. Anyway, it's hard. The work of it is work. To refrain not only from the fasting, but refraining from, there's a whole list of things that you need to not do: smoke, drink, sexual relationships, all of that for that month. There's the 5 times a day praying. It's pretty uncomfortable. And it's work. And it's work to focus. It's work to create that focus that channels one's attention away from the grumbling belly and toward God, toward compassion, toward love. It's akin to driving an 8-foot copper rod into the rocky, clayey earth, where persistence and discipline and care win out over the brute force and expediency. For the faithful Muslim, perhaps, Ramadan becomes their grounding rod. Ramadan is about remembering both who we are and to whom we belong. In our Mill Creek DNA, we claim that we ground ourselves in spiritual practices that nurture our connection to our spiritual source. So I have to ask, what is your grounding rod? What is your grounding rod? How do you choose to channel the excess energies of this life back into your source? Where do you find your ground? Every time when I bring us into a time of meditation, I say, find your ground. I don't know what you think that means. I'm not entirely sure what I think that means. Finding that connection, finding that space, that place where we can move the excess energies of our life back to their source. For some, their ground may be meditation or prayer. For some, their ground is immersing themselves in the natural world. For some of us, it may simply be sharing a meal with another person. It may be dancing, maybe singing, watching the crescent moon rise. A quiet conversation with someone you love, a breath, and then another. In our tradition, in Unitarian Universalist tradition, it is not what your particular practice looks like. We have a plurality of practices. But it is really vitally important to know the intention you bring to it. Fast. Fast if your intention is to focus your attention away from physical desires and towards the Spirit. Or walk if your intention is to feel the motion of your body in this world. Pray if your intention is to listen to the deepest truths you know. Breathe if your intention is to experience the transformation of peace to love, or love to peace Find whatever it is that connects you to your ground, that allows the lightning strikes and surges of this world to safely pass through into the earth, into your source, so they do not harm you. The poet David White writes this about ground. He says, "Ground is what lies beneath our feet. It is the place where we already stand, a state of recognition, the place or the circumstances to which we belong, whether we wish to or not. It is what holds and supports us, but also what we do not want to be true. It is what challenges us physically or psychologically, irrespective of our hoped-for needs. It is the living underlying foundation that tells us what we are, where we are, what season we are in, and what, no matter what we wish in the abstract, what is about to happen to our body in this world or in the conversation between the two." So my invitation to us today is to do this hard work of establishing or reestablishing your grounding rod, the spiritual practice of moving the excess currents of energy that are coming at you into what lies beneath our feet, that to which we belong, that to which tells us what we are, where we are, and to whom we belong. To allow our ground to absorb what is too much for us to hold alone, so that we may once again look upon each other with compassion and grace and love, so we may awaken to love, full of just enough energy to bless this world with nothing less than our presence. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live this blessing.